Welcome, everyone. I'm Stephen Garvey, founder, leader of National Citizens Alliance, NCA. We are anti globalist, pro Canadian. We believe in putting the Canadian people first. And you can view our policies at www.nationalcitizensalliance.ca. And before I begin I want to announce two events coming up, NCA major events coming up before we break for Christmas. We are holding public discussions on mass immigration, and this is we're inviting all the public to come and share your experience, share your thoughts on the mass immigration agenda that's been going on for decades by the establishment across both sides of the aisle. Uh, These will be taking place in Halifax, Saturday, June 24th, and in Red Deer, Alberta, on Saturday, June 24th. And we will be making further announcements about these events. Anyone who's on Facebook, we have two events up for these June 24th public discussions. So please share it. Please come out. Please share your input. We want to hear from you, regardless of your perspective. This is an open dialogue on November 24th. And today I'm going to be focusing again on the Bank of Canada, which the National Citizens Alliance views at the pinnacle of the corruption in the country because money permeates every aspect of our society. And I'm going to provide the facts with you today, some major facts, and show how it's negatively impacting you and your family, Canadian businesses. It's quite shocking what I will be sharing today. But the silver lining here is that there's a viable political solution. We have the Bank of Canada Act. All we have to do is reinstitute it and then pay back the debt. But I'm going to get into that later. But as far as we're concerned at National Citizens Alliance, since the early 1970s, Canada has been grossly mismanaged by establishment conservatives and establishment liberals. This country, in terms of monetary policy and in many other respects, even if we look at CPP, immigration, a whole bunch of other issues, this country is being grossly mismanaged. There's supreme incompetence in Ottawa, and we believe there's probably criminal corruption going on in Ottawa. And the National Citizens Alliance wants to drain these career entrenched parties, politicians out of Ottawa. They have lost their way. They are harming you and your family and Canadian businesses. And I'm going to provide the facts today. But before I get into that, whenever the Bank of Canada comes up and anyone who questions these establishment parties, they either ignore you or they say, quote, it's good for the economy. Or they just mentions abstractly inflation. Well, we say bogus to these responses. These are doublespeak, fork tongue talking, and I will show it today. This Bank of Canada and what I'm talking about is in 1974, Pierre Trudeau shifted the public lending right of the Bank of Canada to central banksters. That's what happened. Previous to 1974, the Bank of Canada belonged to the Canadian people. After 1974, it belonged to central banksters and the government. And ever since then, the country has been on a downward spiral. in terms of debt, in terms of inflation, in terms of taxation, extreme taxation, and then we get the extreme mass immigration on top of it, on and on. The outflow of foreign money. That's when our country turned, our young country, I should add, turned for the worse. And it's both these establishment conservatives and establishment liberals. They have their dirty fingerprints all over this mess in Canada. So we've had to form the National Citizens Alliance to try and salvage our country, save our country, redirect our country from the gross mismanagement in Ottawa. And I'm going to be very clear. What happened in 1974, the shifting the public lending right, there's some entities that benefited from that. The commercial banks, the central banks, the international banking cartel, and the federal government. And what's happening is these central banksters are printing our currency. It's a fiat currency. It's just ones and zeros. It's not backed by gold or silver because we stopped that in 1929. It's backed by other fiat currencies. The Canadian dollar is an IOU. It's contingent on the confidence of the Canadian people in this fiat currency. If there's no confidence, that currency is nothing. It means nothing. It's just ones and zeros on a piece of paper. Unfortunately, this fiat currency system that we have right now is on the verge of a major collapse at some point. It's not sustainable. And I'm going to show what's happening to Canada since 1974. It's quite disturbing. Another thing, another benefit are these establishment parties. The National Citizens Alliance, they believes that they must be getting some kind of kickbacks from these central banks, commercial banks, to keep their mouths shut on this issue, to lie to the Canadian people continuously, to distract the Canadian people by just uttering it's good for the economy, all inflation, just something abstract the Canadian people can't understand. So they're on the take, these establishment entrenched parties. Who loses from the control of our currency, control of our monetary system by the international central banks? Who loses? Clearly the Canadian people. We've been losing for decades. We are debt enslaved to these central banks and the government through debt service payments of $64 billion plus a year nationally and growing. Compound interest debt service payments to these central banksters. So you are enslaved, you and your family. And what that means is less money for services in Canada. You're getting less money for your tax dollars, less service for your tax dollars. That's what it translates into. These central banks, the central banking cartel, the Bank of International Settlements, the IMF, the World Bank, they control your life because they control the currency. They control your wealth. Your money in the bank, they control that. That's all the fiat currency. Inflation is another thing, and I'm going to show this tonight, is that they've been printing this money like crazy to keep this phony fiat system afloat. Since 1974, there's been an over 800% increase in the money supply in Canada. 800% plus increase. It's obscene. And that translates into inflation. That means the cost of your living is going up every time they print the currency. because the Canadian dollar is devaluing, and I'm going to show that to you. And what's worse, when they print the currency, they charge you interest on that money. They charge you interest on that money. It's horrible. So I'm going to put up some graphs here everyone needs to understand. This is the federal debt, 1867 to 2017. And these establishment parties were doing fine up until around 1974. And you can see it right here. As soon as Pierre Trudeau shifted the public lending right to the central banksters, look at the debt. And then there's debt service payments. And look at the conservatives just growing the debt, growing the debt. And then there's a downturn and a boom. And they paid off very little during that boom period. And now it's just growing, growing, growing. And we're over 657 billion in federal debt right now, over 1 trillion in market debt, and they keep spending more of your money. It's not even your money, it's money, it's just more debt. They just keep piling the debt on. And that's what's happening. And this is ever since 1974. That's why we say this country is grossly mismanaged by establishment conservatives and establishment liberals. They both need to be drained out of Ottawa. They have lost their way. They are completely incompetent, and they lie to the Canadian people every day. Look at the debt. Look at that. And look at that before. Almost no debt up to there. That's horrendous, everyone. Just remember that. And it's both of them. Both those parties are contributing to the demise of Canada. And this other graph shows the money supply. Again, it was all stable up to 1974. Right here. And then there's an over 800% increase in the money supply since the central bankers started printing our currency in secrecy. So back prior to 1974, it was around, the money supply was about 0.1 trillion. And it was pretty steady there. Actually, it was 0.05 trillion. And then it has ballooned to where we are now, and it's over 0.8 trillion money supply. Almost $1 trillion money supply. And there's all interest payments on this money supply. It's just ones and zero on paper. They're charging you interest, and this is inflation. Every time they print the currency in secrecy, it's devaluing the Canadian dollar. That's what's going on. It means your purchasing power is way less. And I'm going to show you some evidence of that right here. This is an interesting thing. This shows the value of the Canadian dollar in 1973. If we compare it to 2017, the consumer price index is 432.24% higher. 430% plus higher than prices in 1973. In other words, the Canadian dollar in 1973 is equivalent to purchasing power of $532.24. And that's what we mean by inflation. The Canadian dollar has way less value. Look at that. Look at the change since right before 1974. Look at the change. A difference of 432 $4 over 44 years. I think a lot of older people can relate to this. And this is what's going on. And this is inflation. Every time they print the currency, it is inflation. And it's just devaluing the dollar. Your purchasing power is less. And that's what's going on. It's very disturbing. And I'm going to talk about one thing here, and the Canada Infrastructure Bank. And this is another fallout of what they did in 1974. Because if we had the true Bank of Canada in place, we would have no need for a Canada Infrastructure Bank. But the current government created this bureaucracy. It's more bureaucracy. They created a crown corporation called the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and basically they're putting your tax dollars into this crown corporation, and then they're giving it to certain private sector entities to build infrastructure. And there's already been concerns over favoritism and favoring certain companies by giving them very low interest loans. But that's your money in that bank. It's created a whole new bureaucracy in Ottawa, which you're paying for. And here's the bank right here. You can go onto their website right here, the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Look at this. They have a board of directors. They have a minister. That's all costing money. Another layer to the bloated bureaucracy in Ottawa. Just what we need. More bureaucracy. They have $35 billion of your money in that so-called bank. And they are distributing it who knows how. But it's not really a bank. It's just a holding of your tax dollars. And it shouldn't have to be. What we want to do is, and the great thing is, we want to return to the Bank of Canada Act of 1934. We already have the legislation. All we have to do, Canadians, is reinstitute the Bank of Canada Act. Go back to the true Bank of Canada, which belongs to the Canadian people. And we could fund infrastructure like we did with that bank in the past. If you look at the history of Canada, we used the true Bank of Canada to fund the infrastructure of our country at 0% interest. 0% interest. And that bank is in service of the people, not central banksters controlling the money supply, like right now, causing inflation, printing our fiat currency in secrecy. This is all wrong. All we have to do is reinstitute the Bank of Canada, pay off the federal debt, which is just growing and growing, pay it off, print the currency. There'll be inflation, some inflation, but it's better than what we have with this growing debt, the growing money supply, these central bankers controlling our money. That's what we should be doing as a country. This is common sense. This puts the Canadian people first. This is not sustainable, what's going on. This debt is not sustainable. And remember, the commercial banks, the central banks are all benefiting. And then money's kicking back to those establishment parties. So the little game keeps going on while the Canadian people suffer. And look at that, the money supply. They just keep printing money. But where is all that money going? Where is all that money going? They're just trying to patch this broken monetary system of fiat currency. That's what's going on, everyone. And we're going to do more on the Bank of Canada. I hope the message is clear today. Like I said, all we have to do is reinstitute the Bank of Canada Act of 1934, pay off this growing federal debt, fund our infrastructure through the True Bank of Canada, like we've done in the beginnings of Canada. That's all we have to do. Be fiscally responsible. Pay off the debt that's owing. And we looked at the books in Ottawa. We figure the NCA can save you, the taxpayer, at least $150 billion in 1 year. $150 billion savings. So please share this message today if this resonates with you. And we look forward to seeing you at these important public discussions coming up on June 24th. And I want to wish everyone a great evening, and thank you for joining us today.